Welcome to the Momentum Flow podcast, where ideas, innovations, and experiences are shared to create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and let's keep the momentum flow going. Today, I'm thrilled and honored to be joined by Sid Brown, the CEO of NFI, one of the largest and most successful family-owned 3PL logistic companies in North America. Since 1932, NFI has evolved from a regional trucking company into a fully integrated supply chain solutions platform, while staying rooted in the values of a multi-generation family business. Sid, welcome to the Momentum Flow.
Thank you, Luis. It's my honor to be with you on this podcast. I hope we can share some information between the two of us that maybe some folks will learn something from it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sid. I'm honored that you're here. So now, before we jump into the conversation, let's give our audience a quick look at the scale and scope of NFI today. For those of you who may not know the full story, here's a short video overview of how NFI has evolved into the logistic platform that it is today.
NFI, a leading 3PL across North America. But it didn't start out that way. One guy with one truck and a dream. He most certainly didn't do it alone. Through hard work and dedication, we've grown together. We're the movers and the shakers. We've electrified the industry. We've broken barriers and crossed borders. We're a diverse group of people, different locations, different backgrounds, and different personalities. But each day we show up for our customers, for NFI, and for each other. Bleed Blue has become our rally cry. Through unprecedented events, and in events we're celebrating. It can be seen by the safety and persistence of our drivers and between the walls of our warehouses as teams work against deadlines. It can be heard during each meeting. It can be felt when we all come together for a common goal. Because of you, because of our teams, we're here. Once hailed as the best kept secret in supply chain, well, the secret's out.
See, that video really captured the scale of what NFI has become, but the story behind it is just as fascinating. So let's get started. So NFI began almost 100 years ago, right? 1932. And you represent the third generation of leadership. What are some of those early experiences growing up around the company that shape how you think about leadership today?
Well, Luis, it's been a real journey that I've taken with my brothers. I can share a few things that this company, when we started, was strictly a trucking company for the most part. It was small, it wasn't big. We used to work after school in the shop or in the, we had one little warehouse behind the main shop, sweeping floors or putting license plates on trucks. When you're in grade school or high school, you're limited in what you can do, but we kind of got the understanding of what the business was about. Growing up in a small business, when you'd walk into the office, you knew everybody, and it was a real family atmosphere. And obviously, as we've transformed ourselves over the years, the business has grown dramatically. But those things you learn from those early days are something that kind of give you a foundation for understanding what it takes to get from one point to another. And, it was one thing for sure, it instilled in myself and my brothers the real opportunity to understand the value of hard work, and that nothing comes easy, and that things can absolutely change in a moment's notice, and that you got to be on your feet to be able to make decisions in a ever-changing environment, because the supply chain, which it wasn't really known as the supply chain back then, it really, transitions itself from day to day. Just look at today's environment as an example.
Yeah. Now, many family businesses remain regional for a lot of the reasons that you just said, right? The fear of growth sometimes. But what were the key moments when NFI transitioned from a traditional trucking company into a broader logistic platform that you are today?
So a couple of things I would tell you. There were times as the business grew. And by the way, when the business was really small and my dad was growing the business, I wanted to share that he had this little office, and then he started buying up these houses next door. And he was buying up the houses because he needed growth of people. And in each house, he put a different department. So you would go from house to house to house.
I haven't heard that story.
Departments. So it was kind of ironic but it was all oriented around growth. And my dad instilled in me the idea that if you don't grow, you die. And there were times when we were growing up that we had some really good years, relatively speaking, and we would go on nice vacations down to Miami Beach, Florida. Mm-hmm. And then there were other years where things were tough, and we would go to the Motor Lodge in Wildwood, New Jersey, the Jersey Shore. Okay. Well, when you're a kid, you're kind of like, well, what happened from one year to the next year? But what you learned was, in the trucking business, it's very cyclical and very dependent on certain industries, that if you're so focused on one industry, which at that time we were very focused on the building products industry, which was tied to the housing industry, there were huge fluctuations. Okay. So one of the things that I believed we needed to do was to try to figure out how to steady the earnings of the business by doing things other than just pure over-the-road trucking.
Okay.
And so there was an evolution. It didn't happen overnight because our roots were in this one-way truckload environment, to an evolution that, we can talk about, but it didn't happen, in a couple of years. It happened in a couple of decades. And so I think it's important to kind of put it in perspective in terms of how we migrated from, a one-trick pony to a multiple service offering in the supply chain.
That's super interesting. Now, there's a moment in time that you step into the CEO role, right? And at that time, you assess and you look at the company and you say, which parts of the company's culture and philosophy do I need to basically preserve? And what do I need to evolve? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I could talk a lot about it. Probably could write a book about it if you really want to know the truth.
Maybe you should.
Yeah, I probably should. So as background, we almost, in the late 80s, during what they called the savings and loan crisis, which was a big recessionary event, we almost went bankrupt. And we were one step away. We had to renegotiate with our lenders. We had to shrink the company. It wasn't a very happy time. And it was, we all had personal guarantees on debt, just didn't know what the future held for us. And, my brothers and I were in their, early 30s, and, it's a treacherous time in your career to go through a pretty big stumbling block. Mm-hmm. But what we what we did to try to change the nature of the business was to say, all right, we got to diversify. We really got to invest in our people. And we've got to start thinking about what the values are moving forward that we want to run this business on that's different than what the values that my dad ran the business on. Because just not too later from when I took over as CEO, we went through the owner's process of buying my dad out of the business, which, by the way, took about 7 years. And so, you want to set your own tone. His leadership style was different than my leadership style. The way, and I don't want to say this in a negative sense, but the way employees were treated back in the 70s and 80s began to evolve differently in the 90s and forward, where collaboration, openness became much more of a reality if you were going to be successful as the workforce changed. And that workforce continues to change today as we deal with, multiple generations of, millennials, Generation X, Generation Y. It's changed in each generation. You have to adapt to the values that are important to them to see how you can kind of change with the times. Yeah. So it was very, very important for me to, one, create a culture where people and customers were at the center of that culture. And that if we took care of our people and serviced the hell out of our customers, we would be successful. And so that's kind of my mantra as we started to kind of take over from my dad and his generation with my brothers. And what happened was there was a leadership transition that took place with a number of employees that were, aligned with my father and his generation that Ike, Jeff, and I brought into our generation. And Ike and Jeff are my two brothers, as you know.
No, absolutely. You're really that foundation of family stewardship, people, customers, is powerful, right? And but really, you didn't just, as NFI, preserve legacy. I would say you really scale it up dramatically. So let's talk about how that growth actually happened. So you've grown through both organic expansion and acquisitions across transportation and warehousing, organic expansion and acquisitions. So what's your framework when you're evaluating whether an acquisition specifically fits the NFI platform, right? It's sometimes difficult, right? It's a family business, it needs to fit. So what's your framework of thought when you do that?
Well, I try to keep it simple, number one. And number two, we can talk about the different types of businesses that I've bought over a period of time, because in addition to just both warehousing and transportation, we've got involved in port services, we've got involved in freight brokerage. At one point, I bought a packaging company. So I keep it simple. There's a couple of fundamental principles that I look at on every acquisition. One is, can I take the customer base that we are picking up, and can I service them with what we do at NFI that they didn't have an opportunity to see, either a different service offering or a different geographical offering. Okay, so taking what we do and cross-selling into that customer base and seeing what they need.
Okay.
The second part of that is, can I acquire a company that has a service offering or a geographical footprint that my customers don't have today that they could take advantage of? Okay. And that's as simple as I usually look at it. If I can't find those kinds of matches, then I'm not sure it's the right acquisition opportunity for me. I don't have to make it any more confusing than that.
I think it makes all sense, right? You need to complement one way or the other your current business, right? Whether it's in geography, customer base, service, it makes all sense to me. Now, integration.
Let me if I could for a second, I didn't really address the people culture of those acquisitions. And I think it's important because we are a family business. Okay. And I've bought companies that were part of divisions of publicly traded companies. I've bought companies that were coming out of bankruptcy. I bought companies that the founder was retiring and he didn't have any succession plan. It runs the whole gamut. And there's probably been more than 35 of these acquisitions, and not all of them have been successful. And nobody bats 1,000. They just don't. So what you try to find is, does the culture kind of look like it's a culture that will be easily integrated into what we are all about? And if it isn't, then maybe I need to preserve that culture for a period of time and not just smash it in, so to say, into the NFI culture.
Okay.
And by the way, a lot of times you can learn from acquisitions what they do well and maybe change our culture to adopt some of those principles.
Yeah, I love that. So you've been super open to enriching your own culture, not just really, and I think that talks a lot about leadership and that stewardship of the 80-20, right? Keeping the core of the culture, but at the same time evolving in when it makes sense, right? When you find something that makes absolute sense.
Correct.
Now, integration, as you know, you acquire companies, right? And suddenly you go into integrating them, and you address a little bit about that, and that's when really things either succeed or fail, right? So how do you ensure companies joining NFI align with the culture? So you look at the complementary business, you look if they can add something, but at a certain moment, welcome to the family. What's your process of integrating an acquisition?
So one of the things that, first of all, making the acquisition is probably the easy part. Integrating it is the hard part, right?
For sure.
So, and I've learned certain acquisitions we made, we went right in the beginning and said, you're going to all be NFI. We're going to NFI you. Okay. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Think about this. When somebody hires you, your loyalty is to that person that hired you. Mm-hmm. When somebody acquires you, you got to earn that loyalty. You got to earn that trust. And so there's a different approach. So it's almost like, show me. They're there saying, show me what you're all about. Prove to me that you say who you are by your actions, by the way you interact with the people, on and on. So it's important that you think about that as a process. The other thing that I've set up with my team is we really have a whole playbook put together of how you go about integrating a business from the back office to the sales, to the people, to the medical benefits, on and on. And so we put together a playbook. Each time you go in, the playbook has to be modified, obviously, because each company is a little bit different. But we have a team that we extract from our day-to-day business that works on the integration. Because if you don't do that, it won't happen by accident. It's got to have a purpose. It's got to have timing. And those people have to have a mission of understanding that at a certain date, that playbook has been accomplished. Certain parts of that playbook may happen immediately. Some may be postponed for a year or two. That all depends on the acquisition. So, for example, a simple thing, we acquire a company, it's got a brand. Do we want to just get rid of that brand right away, or does that brand have some real strength in the marketplace that we may want to keep for a period of time? So, I think what I learned over time is if you don't have a playbook and you just go in and say, hey, I just want to grow, I'm going to buy this company, your chances of failure will go up significantly. So you really need to make sure that you have figured out exactly what you want to do, when you want to do it, and the timing, and recognize that some things may change over time, but at the end of the day, there's a goal line, and you want to get to that goal line.
That's really rich and a lot of learnings from that conversation. So I had planned to ask you, but I don't think it makes sense anymore about if there was one that in your mind, one of those acquisitions that really accelerate your journey. Only if you want to do it. If not, I think
Yeah. There are people to talk about, what have you done, how you've done it. Is there one that was really just, transformative? So I would tell you there was a couple smaller ones when I, was early on in the process that were disasters. Okay. I learned from the disasters. The other thing I learned from that is never bet the ranch on any one acquisition. Okay. Because chances are, and I don't, the statistics are that more acquisitions fail to add to shareholder equity than actually do. So if the odds are against you to start with, then you really need to kind of make sure that if you are going to do a transformative deal, that you do it very thoughtfully. The deal in my mind is when we bought a company called California Cartage.
Yeah,
it was a big player at all the ports around the country. It was getting us into the international side of the business in a way that we had never been before. And it added about 25 to 30% in one fell swoop to our revenue. Had a great group of people, long tenured people that were really proud. It was a family-run business by a guy named Mr. Curry. And when I negotiated that deal, he was 86 years old. I felt like I was negotiating all over again the buyout of my dad because he was elder in his career. So I had learned some lessons along the way about buying that company. But what we did is we kept the Cal Cartage brand. What we did is we kept the people in place. We learned from them. We took what they were good at and really tried to understand how we could adopt some of that into our business. They had size, they had big customers, they had great geography. What they didn't have is they didn't have real estate that they controlled. They were leasing everything. And when you're at the ports, we felt like we ought to have some ownership position so we can, solidify our long-term outlook and not be beholden to some landlords that one day may not give us a favorable rate or a competitive rate out in the marketplace. So Cal Cartage was a transformative deal. And to this day, we still use the Cal Cartage brand because it's so well known in international circuits.
Yeah, I think that talks a lot, and credit to you that, when you acquire a company, you need to integrate, but you don't need to just dismember, right? And keep what is useful and just continue growing it as part of the new family. So absolutely, that makes all sense. Thanks for that. So now let me pivot to, you grow organically, you go through growth through acquisitions, but there's another dimension of growth, right? You've been, as NFI, you have really been willing to invest early in emerging technologies, right? And you've done that. So now you've been ahead of the curve in areas like warehouse robotics and electric trucks. So what convinced you early on that technology will become such a defining competitive advantage in logistics for NFI?
So it's interesting. When my father was younger in his career, he was always thinking about what's the next best thing. And back then, the size of the trailers and the configuration of the cabs, the tractors, was a challenge because back then the trailers were 45 feet long. And he came up with the first innovative design to work on a 48-foot trailer with a cab. And then he came up with the 53-foot trailer with a redesigned cab. And he worked with the OEMs on both the trailer and tractor side. And we were at the forefront of saying, hey, we're going to be able to stay within the overall length limits by really looking at how we can use our brains to reconfigure the units. So that idea of trying to be ahead of the curve was kind of instilled in us. So from that point on, I don't know that we've been at what I would call the bleeding edge of technology, maybe better known as the leading edge for us, is to try things. And if you try things, see how it works. Again, don't bet the ranch on any one thing. And try a host of different things. Be open to saying, oh, well, that's just the way we do it. We're going to continue to do it. No, maybe there's a better mousetrap out there to do something. And whether that's software, whether that's equipment, whether that's, automation, and now today, all the things are revolving around artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
We're trying everything at times to do that. And so sometimes we make some bad bets and sometimes we make some good bets. So electrification is something that I think we made a good bet on. We invested in. Right now during this Iran war, fuel prices are going crazy. I wish my fleet was more electric than it is.
I fully understand.
Things go back and forth. But long term, I do believe that there's a place for electric trucks. And we operate one of the biggest fleets on the West Coast now. We've invested $35-40 million in a whole charging network out there with our terminal. So we're not afraid to take a leap when we see an opportunity.
No, I know that you've always been forward thinking, and you just hinted about it, but I need to ask about it. So you also launched NFI Ventures, right? So investing directly in emerging supply chain technologies. So what motivated that decision that is really leading edge, as you use your words, to create a venture investment arm rather than just simply partner with technology providers? What was going through your mind?
Yeah, so I think I need to give a little perspective on the business, the family business here for a second.
Uh-huh.
I am third generation. My two brothers are with me in that third generation. We each have 3 children. So there are 9 members of the fourth generation. 6 of the 9 members are in the business, and they have all come up through the ranks of the business. As we are looking at the world of technology today, quite frankly, I think the younger people are better equipped at taking a look at emerging technologies than the older folks like us out there today that need a little bit of youth to help us think it through. So they came to us and said, we'd like to think about investing through the family office in opportunities in the logistics industry that are startups that NFI may or may not use. And NFI may be a beta site or may be one of the first customers, but we want to look at investing. So we funded some money into a vehicle where the 9 of them make the investments. We don't have anything to do with it. They decide what companies they want to invest in. They decide if they want to not only invest, but also have NFI maybe become a beta site or one of the first customers. And we've had some real success at bringing some emerging technologies to our platform. And we've also had some failures. I mean, that's the nature of venture investing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what it's provided us with is a pipeline of opportunities out there to look at that I don't think we would have normally looked at. Sometimes we do this as co-investors, sometimes we do it as just investors ourselves. It all depends. So for example, Luis, as you generate your opportunities in what you're trying to do with your fund, there will probably be interactions between you and our venture fund to try to say, hey, what are you looking at? Does it make sense? Because you need users.
Co-invest. Yeah, makes all sense.
To effectuate proof of concept. So I'm sure that may come up as you continue your journey. Absolutely.
See, that's really thank you for that. So now, technology is great, right? It creates tremendous opportunities. It's close to my heart nowadays, but at the same time, it also introduces new types of risk across the transportation ecosystem, right? So let's go in that direction in the conversation. So cargo theft and broker fraud have become increasingly sophisticated. You know it probably better than anyone, right? So from your perspective, how significant has this problem become for the industry in general?
So I think it's become hugely significant. And I can tell you, for us, we've gotten hit just in this last 90 days. We had 17 loads stolen, 17. we had a rash, and we've recovered a few of them, but it's all dealing with what I call cyber invasions of the system out there, people buying and motor carrier numbers and transforming numbers, hacking into systems. I mean, it's become really challenging in the freight brokerage business to make sure you have the checks and balances to it. We've been working with the FBI. We've been working with some of the state agencies. In fact, as we are doing this video right now, there's a big meeting in Philadelphia, and I think there's about 300 people attending at the FBI's offices, shippers, brokers, truckers, all around. How do we combat this theft that's taking place out there? There are gangs in Eastern Europe and Asia that have used technology to steal trucks. The old way was, they pull trucks out of a yard, they hijack people. They don't do that anymore. It's all done by technology today.
Yeah, no. As logistics platforms become more digital, realities, cyber risk, identity theft. You didn't talk about it, but they're also increasing, right? So two questions to that. So, are there any safeguards that you're putting as an operator to protect your customers? And the second one is, as an industry, you talk a little bit about the meeting happening today, but is there more to be done as collaboration between carriers, brokers, technology providers to address those threats?
Yeah, there's no question. There's a lot to be done. Part of it has to be done at the federal level. You can't do it at the state level because every state, you'd go nuts trying to get every state to play on the same page.
Yep.
So the federal government has started to enact some things. It's become big enough now that we're getting people to listen to what we need some help on around this whole idea of identity theft and motor carrier compliance and ELD compliance. So yes, we have instituted some software solutions that have really tightened up some of these opportunities for the thieves to get into our systems. We have really worked on determining the profiles, particularly of the non-domiciled drivers out there today. It's almost like you could almost predict the type of people that are going to try to steal your freight today. So yes, I believe right now today, shippers that use us are much better in terms of our ability to watch over their cargo. But is it something that is not, they're going to come in, they're still going to try to get at us. And yeah, we might lose some more loads because everybody's losing loads today. But if we can limit it and the one thing I will tell you that I think is out there today is there's technology that I just learned about that you could put in packaging that is not battery driven, it's radio wave driven, so that you could, it's almost like an RFID tag that you could monitor the location of all these boxes going all over the place. But we got to get the shippers to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? Because it just can't be the trucker saying, oh, well, we're going to go put these tags in all the boxes because then you're going to violate the integrity of the loads.
I fully agree, but at the same time, that has been the challenge of RFID itself, right? Trying to align governments, companies, providers, technology is not easy, but, we talk about the loom and gloom, and there's a piece of that, and you talk about it. But on the other part, I think there's also an exciting part with the advent of technology, right? And, there's autonomous trucking, it's moving from concept to real world pilots, right? So how do you see autonomous driving shaping freight transportation over the next decade? Where do you see that going?
It's a great question because I think if you're running a business today, if you don't think hard about where the world is going and how technology is going to replace what you're doing today with some other form, I think you're kidding yourself. So what does that mean? So autonomous trucking, yeah, it's happening. It will get there. It's taking time. Is it going to happen overnight? No. I think what you're going to see, because we've been doing our research, is you may go from terminal to terminal, so to say, or depot to depot, or parking lot to parking lot, and use these autonomous trucks to begin with, and then you may have local drivers that actually do the local deliveries. When that technology ultimately gets better, you may end up with a total autonomous truck going from point A to point B. What is interesting is, airplanes today can fly themselves. You don't need pilots.
Mhm.
But why do you have pilots? In case of an emergency.
Mhm.
Okay, with those 80,000-pound trucks going down the highway, I think it's going to be a while before the public accepts the fact that maybe there's not somebody there in case of an emergency.
Totally agree. I think only in closed loops, short distance, not that many people. But
I do think long distance actually has an opportunity for autonomous trucks. I think they'll just be gauged, and there'll have to be some backup systems. So if something happens, how do you recover a truck? If it stops right in the middle of a highway, those types of things, you have to have but they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So I think long-term autonomous trucking will have a place. And then what you're doing is not managing human capital. You're managing capital allocated against the technology to move the freight. So it's a different skill set.
Now they're autonomous and they're electric, right? So because you've done deployment of electric trucks as well. So any lessons you learned from the electric side, electric trucks that you want to share?
Yeah, I think battery technology is going to continue to get better. Okay, right now the batteries are too heavy and they don't take too long to charge, and they don't have the range. Okay, you can see even in the cars today and with the trucks and the generations, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. Look, the Tesla truck's up to 450 miles. I just read another demo truck that went up to 700 miles on battery technology. So and then the charging's getting much quicker. So it will get there. It's just a matter of time before it gets there. Now, is diesel going away tomorrow? No. All right. Is natural gas going away tomorrow? No. So it's probably going to be a combination of things for a while. But longer term, I think for the environment, at least, I think electrification has a lot of things going in its favor.
I think that's a great way as we converge to the end of our conversation. Let me see the visionary, right? Think 10, 15 years down the road, the fourth generation has taken the helm of NFI. How does freight network of the future look like? How does it look? How do you see it?
Well, I wonder about that, because I know that when my dad started, we did everything manual. We had these cards that you would write on the loads, and you'd put them up on a load board, and you'd move the cards from one place to the next when the load was being hauled. And the idea of using computers was not even in the realm back then, right? So you got to put it in perspective of what it was like back then. Absolutely, things are going to change. I think optimization. I think the idea. I don't know the exact number, but there's X amount of loads today that are running empty miles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If the whole network can get better and you cut that in half, or 65%, 70%, look, you don't need as many assets to move the freight because you've optimized it better, right? So I think the world of supply chain will become much more optimized using technology. I think there has to be a lot more data sharing between the shippers and the providers so that we can get to the truth of how to best move things. This idea of a shipper keeping their data to themselves, or a third-party provider, taking only limited parts of the data. There's got to be total transparency so we can get to the truth of what's the best way to do it. And then you're going to have multiple shippers collaborating. And I think the supply chain providers really will be the go-between to help the shippers collaborate in a much more coordinated way. So those are just some of the things I think about in terms of what the future is. Hey, are we going to go back to the Jetsons? Remember the Jetsons?
Yeah, absolutely.
And having things fly? Yeah, and drones being used to deliver stuff? No question. So there will be a definite change in how things are delivered to the store, to the home, to the distribution center, you name it, things are going to change. It's just, I don't know, 20 years from now, hopefully I'm still around. I'll be able to kind of sit back and watch the fourth generation deal with change, because change, here's what I say about change. Change breeds uncertainty, but uncertainty breeds opportunity. And that's the way you have to look about change.
I love that phrase. I'm going to steal it. So that's really rich in context also. And I appreciate that. It's a really, really good insight to yours as we wrap this conversation. Maybe one last question, Sid. As you know, this podcast is called The Momentum Flow, right? And when you reflect in your personal journey, growing up in the family logistic company, becoming the CEO of one of the largest 3PL platforms in North America, if you only can pick one or two leadership principles that have helped you maintain that momentum through decades and decades of change? Just a couple of them. Which would you pick?
So one, leadership, treat your employees the way you'd want to be treated. Really do the right thing by your employees and have the highest integrity in the way you deal with your employees and your customers. I think that's important. I think it is important to make sure that you figure out who your ideal customer is. All customers are not created equal.
Yep.
And when I was younger growing a business, it was all about, wow, I got a top line growth, and I would do business with people in the long run I probably shouldn't have done business with. So either because we weren't the right provider, because we weren't providing that right solution to them, or they were looking for a culture and a mindset that didn't want to embrace us as a partner and just maybe only wanted to use us to handle transactional things. And it's tough. It's really tough in this business and in transactional market to differentiate yourself from your competitors. So I've always looked at leadership as having the vision to find something that's going to differentiate yourself, sharing that vision with your employees, and making sure that everybody's rowing on the same page. As a leader, if you're disconnected, your people are not going to row in the same direction. So you have to keep that done. The other thing I would tell you, we are a privately held company. Mm-hmm. We do not make decisions for the quarter. We make decisions for the long term.
Which I love. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing I would tell you, even though we're a private company, we run this business totally transparent. Everybody knows how we do. Everybody knows what the scorecards are, because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Yeah. And so this entrepreneurial spirit that we have instilled in our people starts from the top. Okay. Mm-hmm. Starts from the Brown family and the entrepreneurial risks sometimes we are willing to take, that our people say, hey, wow, look what they're trying. They're willing to put some dollars against it. And they are, saying, hey, we're going to back you. We're going to support you in these initiatives. Go for it. Run it. We don't run this business day in and day out. Our people run it today. You got to give them the tools and the opportunity to be successful, if they can be, in running whatever they're doing today.
This has been really an incredible conversation from my part. It's rich in history, grounded in operations, forward-looking how you think about technology and leadership, the rooted in performance, entrepreneurship, and really at the end, the overarching, umbrella to it is run on a family-owned business. So I really appreciate your insights, Sid. I don't know if you have any last remarks you want to do before we wrap up?
Yeah, my last remark, Luis, is that I had the opportunity through an acquisition to meet you some 25 years ago.
Yes.
When you were earlier in your career at Colgate.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I didn't know you from Japip, right?
No?
You know, we didn't know each other, but I was trying to make an acquisition. There were certain key things that had to be done. And I sat down with you and I explained the reasons why we were looking for X, Y, or Z. You challenged some of them, rightfully so, as you should in your position. But we came to a common ground that we could move forward as partners going forward in the business. And 25 years later, we are still doing that business. So I want to thank you for setting the foundation of what we set up 25 years ago with the folks at Colgate as we continue to be a really good partner with them. It all started from you and I sitting down. So thank you very much.
See, that's humbling. Thank you. I don't deserve any credit for NFI success. That's you and your brothers, but now at the end, what stands out on me is NFI, how you blended long-term family stewardship with a willingness to make bold, future-shaping bets. Something I've seen both as a customer, as you mentioned, and now as an investor from the other side, looking at your success. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with fellow operators, innovators, and leaders across the supply chain ecosystem. I'm Luis Solana, and this is the Momentum Flow, where clarity, capital, and conviction keep supply chains and leaders moving forward. Sid, thank you once again, and until next time, keep the momentum flow going.